Welcome back to the Desert Well. We are glad to have you with us as we both gather around a well for conversation, but also gather around the well that is Jesus to hear what he has to say about our lives and the things that we go through and experience as well. Today, we're going to start with a very simple question that I think I've been asked a whole bunch of times, and Derek, I'm sure that you have been asked as well. And the very simple question of, hey, how did you become a principal? Did you always want to be a principal? All those sort of things. Kind of how did you get in the role that you have now as you work here at Lamb of God?
Yeah, definitely a good question. As I kind of mentioned earlier, it's not really a super cool story, right? It's just something that I was sitting, I think, in the living room when I was a junior, senior in high school. My mom says, "So what are you going to do?"
I said, "I don't know." Exact question.
Pretty
what
much.
Are you going to do?
What are you going to do
right now, Mom, or like in 10 years? Like, I mean, right now, I'd like to watch some TV.
And I said, "I don't know." She goes, "You should be a teacher." I said, "Why?" She goes, "I think you'd be a good teacher." So I said, "Okay." And so really I went into teaching with the want to coach, right? Coach football. It was an easy transition for that. And actually I went into teaching because I wanted to be a high school counselor, like guidance counselor, because I like that aspect of education also. Yeah. And then I just went into it in terms of Concordia and was going to teach history at first, and found out that I didn't want to teach history pretty quickly. I love history, but didn't want to teach it. And then ended up teaching science. And then as far as like becoming an administrator, it was, I want to get my master's in something. What is something that would help me in my profession in the classroom and better understand the day in and day out? Right. So I got my degree in educational leadership and had no intention, absolutely no intention of using it this early. But God had other plans. So got called here 5 years ago now. This is my 5th year. It's crazy.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to a lot of other people's story, right? In terms of sometimes you just don't know, but it comes down to a conversation from somebody that you love, right? That you look up to that says, "Hey, have you considered this?" And so that's kind of how I got to be where I am in terms of my job, right?
So I'm curious, like, did your mom say, I mean, a little bit, it sounds like I just think you'll be good at it, but even, did she say anything else? I mean, is there another voice in your life that was like, Derek, you're really good at being with kids or being sort of that teaching person, role model that people might look up to? Or was it simply that one conversation and then it was like, that's it. That's all I needed. Just someone kicked me and now the ball is rolling down the hill. I'm an avalanche. Get out of the way. I mean, is it really that simple?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think that there's probably a few other people that said, "Yeah, you should consider this." As I'd mentioned, I went into teaching kind of with the understanding that I wanted to be a high school counselor too. And that stemmed from a high school counselor that I had that was very influential. Right. And I got to work with him a little bit and see kind of the back end of what he did. And so it was kind of interesting in terms of those aspects. I was like, oh, I could do that too. That'd be kind of fun. Get to sit and hang out with high schoolers all day and just talk about their life, right? Talk about things that are going on and talk about what classes they need to take in order to graduate, talk about their future plans. Yeah, I think between my mom and that conversation, and then some of the teachers and other influential people, I'm sure my dad had a conversation about it, at some point in that too. But yeah, the one conversation that I can always go back to is the one that my mom had. And it was very like nonchalant, what are you going to do?
She must have listened to like something or read something that she was supposed to have a conversation like that with you. And then, she just decided today is the day. We are going to shape Derek's future and direct him right now in this ordinary moment.
I'll have to ask her. So, Mom, if you're listening, I'm asking you right now, right? What led you to ask me that question?
Yeah, you'll have to let us know if she says anything. That's super interesting. Just the sort of singular moment that you have in your head of when you remembered that, whether it's the seed that was planted, right? But in your case, I mean, it sounds like, I don't know why the analogy of like a plant, like you just skipped the whole seedling thing. It was just like all right, I am this now, and this is what I'm going to do, which is just, to me, is super unique. Because I mean, my story is a little different in that way. So I always point back to my 8th grade confirmation pastor, and he gave me a book. I don't think I even have the book anymore, to be honest. But on the inside of that book cover, he wrote, "I think you should be a pastor," or something like that. And, I've said this in a sermon here that I still think that's absolutely utterly ridiculous. As an 8th grader, I was not pastor material then. And some days I still wonder if I am today. But nevertheless, it, for me, was that seed planting. Because then from that day, I think I wanted to be an engineer at one point. My dad's a civil engineer. My brother's a civil engineer as well. I wanted to be a meteorologist. I still am extremely fascinated by the weather and just how we can somewhat predict it, but not. I used to joke with people that, the weatherman is the only person who can be wrong 80% of the time and still get paid day after day and is even expected to be incorrect. So I always want to do that. And then I think I had a really transformative experience as a high schooler on a mission trip. And from that day, I wanted to always be a youth pastor in a church somewhere, but a volunteer. And so I went to school, which I guess I didn't know this, or if you already told me, I forgot that I went to school as a history, secondary ed, double major, right? So I wanted to be a high school history teacher and then be a youth pastor on the side, and quickly learned, maybe like you did, that was not going to be the thing for me. I'm good with some numbers, but dates are like, I don't know why, I can't do it. I can't do it. And so when you have to at least be able to say, well, when was World War I? When was World War II? I don't know. So one was long time ago and then another was longer time ago, right? Like I just couldn't ever put those pieces together. And so from that day, it was kind of a, hey, I'm going to go to the seminary. And I always point back, I guess maybe it is a little bit similar. I always point back to a conversation I had with my academic advisor. And he had this very dramatic line, like, because I said, hey, I'm going to go to seminary. And he's like, what are you doing studying secondary ed and history? I just had a friend who died in a car accident yesterday, and you need to do what you love today. And, maybe now as a parent looking back on that, I might be a little terrified of this academic influence in my child. But nevertheless, like, it really set me on the path to go right to seminary. I went as a classics and theology major from Valpo to the seminary, sort of straight on the path to pastor. And here I am. But when I think about the voices, in my head, it's that pastor who planted that seed for me. But then it's also my grandmother, who's now with the Lord, who always told me that I should be a pastor too. That I don't know if I ever told her he had said that or what. I don't even know what she saw in me. I don't think I ever really asked her. But she always told me that she thought I should do that. And it's a very powerful thing, I think is the word I'll use, or a very swaying or influencing, or, fill in the blank, right? It's a very powerful thing when someone that you respect, someone that you love, when they tell you, we call these I see in you conversations, right? So I see in you that you would do good at this. Even though, again, as an 8th grader, as a high schooler, even as a college kid, I never saw myself as a pastor, never saw myself in the shoes that I am now. And yet, here I am. And so today we're going to try and unpack this idea of, hey, who are you? Right. And more importantly, the sub sort of topic, if you're in this world, we're going to talk about what's called vocation. But I want to begin with this simple idea that we as people, we define ourselves so often by what we do, and usually in the sense of like our careers. So, Derek, if you were to meet someone, what do you think is going to be one of the first questions they ask you?
What do you do?
And I'm curious, why do you think that is? Why do you think that's the primary question we ask each other? Why do you think that's the first thing we say?
Well, I think for two reasons. One, it's an easy question for small talk, right?
Mhm.
But that easy question can open up a lot of doors to further conversation, right? Maybe you can find some commonality with that. But two, it also can give you a glimpse into the person, right? Into,
Sure.
okay, if this is what they do for a living, well, they have to be good at it, right? Or they have to love doing it, or they have to have some characteristic quality, et cetera, that led them to that specific job, occupation. And yeah, I think it just goes back to the small talk, though, at least for me initially, right? It's like, okay, well, what do you do? Yeah. Okay. And then let me fill in some other questions and comments that I can have based on your response. Right.
I mean, you spend sometimes 40, 50, 60 hours a week working something, you got to have something to talk about. I mean, I guess there's maybe some people who do exactly the same thing day after day after day, but still there's something there, some well to draw on there. You go, we'll use the well language there. So let's go here. What do you think is the problem with that, if there is one, with asking? And let me be clear, like, is there a problem with the way in which we focus so much on when we meet someone, hey, who are you? What do you do? How can I put you in a bucket? All those sort of things.
I think the only issue is that when we ask that question, that we look to define people by what they do.
Say more.
And that's such a small portion of who somebody is, right? Like, yeah, it's what we do, but there's so much more outside of that specific occupation that defines who that person is, right? And so I think, how can we get to know people beyond what they do?
Sure. Like I hear you almost saying, hey, their identity is not wrapped up in their job.
Absolutely. And I get that question a lot, especially for the listeners, I was on vacation, went to see my wife's family, spent some time in Colorado, and then we went back to my hometown to see my mom, my grandparents. And I ran into a couple people, ran into a dad of a high school friend. I haven't talked to this high school friend in probably 10 plus years. And he goes, hey, I'm so-and-so's dad. I said, oh yeah, I remember. Right. And I remembered his face, couldn't remember his name. And so as soon as he said it, he was like, oh yeah, of course. He goes, so what do you do? I was like, oh, I'm a principal out in Las Vegas. Oh, you're a principal. Right. And so we just kind of started talking a little bit, but it's so natural for us to ask that question, answer that question. But I don't know. Oftentimes I find that we don't go a whole lot of into depth about what we actually do, right?
Sure.
In those conversations. But it is very interesting for sure.
And I think part of it is you're right when you say it's easy, right? It's simple, it's natural. And we spend so much of our life doing it that, hey, well, this is what you do. I am this person. I do this thing. This is how I generate an income, all of those sort of things. So when we think about why this might be an issue, I think the first thing that you brought out and the first sort of problem, right? So if we're thinking about, hey, we're talking about life in the desert, this would be a way, I think, seeing your vocation, your job, seeing one of your vocations, your job being the defining one, is then what do you do with the rest of your life? And so assuming that you work 40 hours a week, that's, 8 hours a day. Well, last time I checked, there's 24 hours in a day. Sure, you need to sleep. Hopefully you sleep for 8 of those too. And so there's only a few more hours, but you're going to do other things too in the span of those days. And so how do you see yourself over the course of those days and over the course of those hours? And so one of the problems with defining our sort of identity, I don't know if you think about the only way we see ourselves as what we do for work, then we miss out on a lot of other things. So when we think about vocation, the first thing I think we want us to see is that it's more than just your job, more than just the work that you do, even if you're volunteering, right? So, we have lots of people who are retired here at Lamb of God who volunteer. And I would even say to you that, hey, even this stuff that you do is not your primary identity. So if that's the case, then Derek, what are some other vocations that we have? Maybe we should stop and define the word. So let's do that, and then we can keep going, because that'll help us answer the question. So Absolutely. How would you define it? I'm curious, how would you define the word vocation?
Well, see, and that's a little bit of a challenging question, at least for me to ask, because of the fact that I'm a Lutheran educator, right? And we talk about vocation quite frequently, at least we did in our college. But I would say our vocation is what we are, and I'm going to use this word and not big call, but just called to do. What is God calling you to do and to serve his kingdom here and his people here? And that can be anything, right?
Sure. So give us an example.
Education is obviously a vocation, right? But other vocations that I have is husband and father, right? Those are two of our vocations that we can't overlook, that oftentimes we do. But it's what we are called to do to serve and help others, getting them to the well that is of Jesus, right? How can we tell them and teach them about Jesus?
I would add to that, the only thing I would add to that is the outside versus inside sort of thing. So usually, I mean, it's June 30th today, we're recording this, and it's summer here, and kids are about to go back to school. And we even ask our preschoolers this, right? Graduation this May. It's so adorable and cute, but it's also like a little sad, right? We get them to come in, and as they march in their caps and gowns, everybody reads like, little Johnny wants to be this thing, little Sally wants to be that thing. And, there's a couple that were, somebody wanted to be a mom, right? Or somebody wanted to be, I forget what else, but that was the only one that really stuck out, because everything else was like, well, I wanted to be a police officer, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a president, whatever they were. And not that those are bad, right? But that's sort of hey, I'm going to choose one thing. And so college kids, right? If you're a high schooler, one of I think the worst questions to ask a high schooler is, hey, what are you going to do with your life? Or what are you going to school for? Because we make that assumption first and foremost that somebody's actually going to college. And right. There are at least one, maybe two kids in our youth group here at XP3 that were not going to school. And I'm sure that with this sort of social pressure around us to go to college, to know exactly what you're going to do for the rest of your adult life as an 18-year-old, come on, like that pressure is immense for them and somewhat crippling, I would even say. And so when we think about the idea of it being something that's given to us versus something that we choose, it helps, I think, relieve the burden from having to have like vocation finding goggles on. Like, I got to look around and see my like exact vocation. I got to find and search for it, because if I don't, get it, then I'm in trouble. My life is meaningless. My life is purposelessness, if you will. And so to have this idea of, well, it's actually something that someone else gives to you that then it requires and needs you to sort of fulfill for them. And so Derek said father, husband, I think we could add something like brother or neighbor to that too.
Yep.
Jesus talks about the parable of the Good Samaritan, and, we talk about that as being a good neighbor. And I always push people to say, well, it doesn't mean that everyone is your neighbor. That's not the meaning of the parable. The meaning of the parable is that whoever is in need that you encounter, now when you act to them, then you become a neighbor to that person. and that's that person that needs you, right? So that's a given vocation. That Samaritan who helps that person on the side of the road, that was a given thing to them. The only thing, though, we both haven't talked about this, is our vocation as child of God. And that, I don't know, like it doesn't really seem to fit that definition. Right?
No, and I think, when you are looking at the word vocation and the definition of vocation, right? I would say that one of the questions that we could ask each other when we first meet each other is, how is your relationship with Jesus? Right? Do you know?
There you go.
Do you know what I mean?
The small talk.
Just get
How
right
are you
to
doing with your faith right now?
But honestly, though, because if that is one of our defining characteristics as followers of Christ, right, we should be willing to share that and wear it on our shoulder, right? And just be like, you know what, this is who I am because of Christ. So it would be a little bit awkward not knowing somebody, right? Be like, do you know Jesus? And what's your relationship with him? Do you want to come to church with me? All those questions. But that is probably the defining characteristic for all of us, right? Is, do we know Jesus, and do we know that he's our Savior? Do we love him? Do we know that he loves us, what he did for us, right? But
yeah, I mean, I think you're trying to get around to hey, that this is the premier vocation, right? And let's go there a little bit. So when we think about the different vocations we have, so if it is someone has a need and a role for me to play in their life, that's sort of the definition of vocation, that God is actually at work in that relationship through me for the sake of someone else, whether it's at my job, yes, or in my house, in my neighborhood, in my community, in my church, all those sort of things. How do you order these? Because at least I'm a type 1 sort of person, type A, whatever you want to call it. I love to have everything in their bucket, in its place. I want to make sure that I'm giving the proper, good, right things, the right amount of time, the right amount of focus. And so I'm not trying to get balance, because I truly believe that there's never anything but balance. There is never such thing as balance, and that it's really just trying to maintain some semblance of busyness here, busyness there. And so with all of that being said, how do we order vocation? So I'm curious, before I say my part, what have you been told about this? What do you think about, hey, Derek, you got to order your vocations, right? So tell me, what's number 1? What's number 2? What's number 3? All those sort of things. How do you go about ordering your vocations?
For me, and I talk about this with the staff all the time, and I think you've heard me say it too, right? Like, my order of operations is God, family, work, school, yada, 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 right? You can fill in the blank after that, right? And so when they come to me looking for a decision, I say, well, where does it fall within those 3 things, right? If it is a family thing or a faith God thing that it takes priority, right? That has to be first. Now, coming back to your question, I would order those things in the same way. If it is a faith, spiritual thing, that has to take priority, right? And then family, so spouse, father, and then everything else. Beck and I, we've had lots of discussions about what does it mean for us to be a family, right? And how does that impact our greater family? Lots of conversation and things going on with that. But anyways, and that's a tough thing too, right? As a spouse and a parent, is what is the order there? We don't have to get into all of that today, of course, but we as the husbands, we are called to take care of our families and lead them, right, to Christ. And so 1 and 2 for me, like the faith background and the family are so intertwined that it's probably very difficult to separate those 2, right? But I know that that's not always the case for people. But for me personally, those two are very intertwined. And then obviously the third is the occupation or vocation of being a Lutheran educator, Lutheran administrator. Again, that role, because we are in the Lutheran world, is also intertwined with the faith. So it's a little hard to separate our faith background and faith from what we do in all those other roles. But that's not always the case for a lot of vocations.
So I've always heard it said basically very similar, right? You got to have your vocation as child of God is number one, most important thing, before all else. That is the thing in your life. And that, when we neglect that vocation, whether it's not being in worship, not being in the scriptures, in prayer, those sort of things, that the rest of our vocations then crumble and fail and don't go so well. But I've been very much wrestling with this idea of numbering, and it's been challenging because I think it's rubbing up against some of the difficulties with that. So we just had a newborn, right? Little Judah Glenn. He's going to turn a month next week, which is just bonkers.
Time
I don't know where this month has gone. I can tell you where it's not gone in my sleep count. I'll tell you that much. But we're getting him baptized next Sunday, and the question is, am I going to baptize him, or is somebody else going to baptize him? And so here's the thought process that I've had for my first two kids. So Zoe and Silas, I did not baptize either of them. And you might say, what? Why not? Wouldn't you love to do that as a dad, to be able to baptize your kid? Like, doesn't that sound like the best thing, the like tip top, awesomest, coolest, whatever as a dad?
Right.
And the reason why was when I made those decisions, it was I wanted to be dad first to them, not pastor. And that made sense in my head, right? And so Pastor Ben, my best friend from PA there, my boss, I guess, if you will, previous pastor boss, he baptized both my kids, right? And it was wonderful and beautiful to just stand there and just be a part of it, right? To make that promise. Because if I do it myself, I basically have to say, parents, do you promise to, do all of these things for your child? Oh, well, yes, I do.
Right. You're saying it on one side,
weird,
asking the question, then you flip around. Yes.
Right. It's like a weird one-man show, right? Do you promise? Well, yes, I do. Well, what do you think? It's just so strange in that way.
Yep.
But now I'm here. I'm the only pastor. Everyone else is busy, right? I mean, there's really only like one vacancy guy in Las Vegas that does a lot of vacancy work. And I'd ask a few other guys and they're all busy. And so, then my mind went to, well, okay, my dad is a licensed lay deacon in the Michigan district, so maybe I could have him do the baptism. And so I sent an email to our circuit visitor and said, hey, like, what do you think about this? Help me sort of think about it. And I got you could if you wanted to. It's up to your discretion, but I would be ready for some questions about that, and probably not your normal practice. And I mean, that's good and right. I get that, because it's, hey, the pastor is the one who we've given the responsibility to baptize in this place, and not everybody, right? So yes, every Christian has the ability to baptize, but when it's not an emergency situation, the pastor is the one who's been given the sort of keys to baptize, if you will, not because I have special powers, but for the sake of good order and the call, all those sort of things. And so then I was like, okay, well, if he can't do it, then I guess that means I'm going to do it. And like I said, I've been wrestling with it because it's very important to me, at least. And maybe this is just one of my like big fears as a person. I'll be honest and vulnerable here, that one of my worst fears in life is that because I'm a pastor, my kids will actually end up hating Jesus because of my work. And it happens all the time. I mean, you look at PKs, pastors' kids, they either seem to like be totally into this Jesus thing, or are like way off the deep end and don't want anything to do with it, and all those sort of things. So the myth in all of this, and I know this, is that somehow I'm going to be the one who can be in so much control to actually make them stay believing in Jesus. Like, how much am I trying to fool myself there?
Right.
But at the same time, the desire is to be a dad first. And so I was talking to my best friend Craig here, he's a pastor in Missouri, in Washington, Missouri. So hello, Craig. And he challenged me on this. We were texting back and forth about it, and said, "Hey, like, well, when you're there, it's not as though you stop being a dad. It's not as though you stop being a pastor when you leave the building. It's not as though you put on a different hat and go home and take it off and be a different person." And, that makes sense. I've heard people say that when you work, when you lead, you need to be yourself. And that's how you do well. It's how you lead people well, all those sort of things. And so it's not about being fake. It's not about being a false person, all those sort of things. And so I've decided that I'm going to baptize Judah. And the sort of justification in my head is that he's right, that Craig is right, that our vocations are not like clothes that we take on and put off if we're going to one job and another, but that they're things that we just kind of have with us all the time, if you will. And in that way, I think it frees us to sort of be multiple things to multiple people, but not in the sense of like, hey, I'm going to be your pastor now, but then Derek, if you go off the deep end, then I'm going to be your friend in a different way, or the other way around. Like, I'm going to be your friend now, but if you start doing this thing, I'm going to be your pastor and sort of come at you hard. And I think, as I'm thinking about this with you, it just makes sense. Well, I'm just going to be who I am, and that is your friend. But yes, I'm also your pastor, and in a weird way, your boss, but whatever. And so we're going to interact and live together, acknowledging all of those things together. And is that going to be like super messy? I think so.
It can be, absolutely, right? And that's where, like, when I was saying too, and I know this is true for you, right, is like our relationship with Jesus is very much so intertwined with our relationship with our families, right?
Right.
And we as humans, we mess up and our relationships are messy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, when you do have a bunch of different hats that you are wearing at one time, right, it can get tricky to balance all of those things, right? But I think you are absolutely right that I don't think that you need to take a hat off and put another hat on, right? You can wear those hats at the same time, right? And when you were telling the story about, the thought process that you have with baptizing Judah, and versus your other two, it made me think of what Becca always said of her dad, because her dad is a pastor.
Right. Her dad's a pastor.
Yeah. And she always said that he threatened the three of them, right? So Becca's one of three, and said, if I ever have to step off the pulpit and come down to the pew to discipline you, I will. But just know that when we get home, whatever I say here is going to probably be, way more strict. The consequences will be worse. And it just made me think of that, like, yes, he's being pastor up there, but he's also still being dad. Right.
It's like why, that's like the opposite end of the, like, I will sometimes carry one of my kids out, go up there and do the benediction and leave with them. That's the, like, the positive way. But it's also like hey, sometimes this means if you're, a church member, that my family might get in the way. Like, they might inconvenience us or you. But in the same time, my family might be inconvenienced, if you will, which I don't, the word doesn't sound right, but it might have to sacrifice. That's a better way to say that. It might have to sacrifice for the sake of the church, to do whatever, to be in a place where somebody needs me, to be Jesus to them in that way. And so it's not as simple, I think, to just say, well, I'm one person here, and now don't bother me because I'll put my pastor hat back on Tuesday at 8:00 when I walk in the door. So let's talk a little bit, because I think we have to at least include a little bit of scripture here. So one of
Before we get into that, did we ever
Sure, go
define
ahead.
vocation? Did we ever truly define
my working definition is just a role that someone else needs you to serve and be for them in their life.
Okay,
the only place that doesn't really fit to me is the relationship with God, because he doesn't need you, right? God doesn't need any of us. God could do whatever he wants, however he wants, whenever he wants, but he chooses to use us. And so maybe it does fit, but to me, it doesn't really fit perfectly there, but that's usually how I explain it. So I don't know. Do we need a better definition?
Nope. I just know that we had talked about it, and then I was like,
Sure.
wait, did we define this? We went into all this discussion, but
if you are listening to this and you just tracked that long for that question, kudos to you. But I totally forgot that we were even talking about that question. So,
and for the listeners too, this is very like unscripted, right? We are just going off the cuff, just talking here. So, thank you for bearing with us with some of those things too. If we ever ask a question of one another, or just a general question and we don't answer it, the reason
let us know in the comments, right?
Yeah, the reason is we're just simply talking and having a discussion. It's not intended to not answer things or not get to something that we had mentioned that we want to get to. Yep. It happens naturally. All right. Anyways, turn it back to you.
No, you're good. I mean, we're talking the desert well, right? We're returning to the well of Jesus, or where our audio introduction says, where life's conversations meet living water, I think is the phrase. And we're having a conversation, and it's not meant to be like a Bible study, or it's not meant to be a sermon, those sort of things, even maybe if you feel like it sometimes sounds like that. So I think that the verse I want to go to is Ephesians 2:9-10, right? So, for by grace you have been saved through faith. It's not of works, so that no one will boast. We know that part really well. But then what's the next one, right? For we are God's workmanship, his handiwork, his craftsmanship, created for good works in Christ Jesus, that he prepared beforehand that we might walk in them. And I love this verse because I think it helps us when we think about the multiple vocations, when we think about the different roles that we have, that all of these are given to us by God, that they were known before time began, and that they're then good works for us to do. And so, not to go all super nerdy, but when Luther was around, walking around, there was really only 3 vocations. I think there's 3, right? Help me out on this. There's the priest. You could be a monk and a nun, and that's it, right? A monk or a nun. That's 3, or is there another one?
Yeah, like in terms of the church, the Catholic Church.
Well, that was the only vocations. Everything else was not a vocation, and that's why Luther is so. If you're probably going to think less of me now that I don't know whatever that third one is. That's okay. But those 3 things, if you wanted to do something that was pleasing in the eyes of God, that's what you had to do. You had to be a priest. You had to go be a nun or a monk, because everything else was less than. Like, it was not as good. It was not as God-pleasing and honoring. And so that's why part of the Reformation is a literal social upheaval in what is important and what matters. And so Luther turns everything up on its head and said, hey, no, whether you are a mom changing a baby's diaper, you are doing good works that God has prepared beforehand for you to walk in them. And so my hope for you, if you're listening to this, is that maybe you've, grown a little bit. If this is all old news to you, then hopefully you've been reminded, right? But if not, then I hope that you've grown in seeing how what you do and who you are in other people's lives is so much bigger than just I used to work and now I'm retired and now I can't do anything. My worth is nothing because I can't serve in the way I used to. I can't give of my time in the way I used to. And so I don't have any meaning and purpose. And I would say to you, no way. No. Think about the friends that you have in your life that you have your regular weekly meal with, or think about that person you call on the phone every week. Think about the people that you pray for on a regular basis. Those are all wonderful, good, just as worthy of all of those things that you used to do, works from God. And to me, even as a 32-year-old person, that's comforting, reassuring, and maybe even inspirational, if you will, a little bit. That, am I the best pastor? No. Am I going to do this forever? No. Am I going to reach all the dreams and goals that I set for myself? No. But do you know what? I'm still doing the thing that God has called and put me here to do. And that's only one thing. Because I'm also a dad. I'm also a husband. I'm a brother. I'm a friend. I'm a neighbor. All of these sort of things. So I just rambled a lot. Derek, do you have anything you want to sort of riff on what I just said there? Or say, I don't think so?
The part of the scripture that, as you were reading it, that really stuck out to me, and you did touch base on this, was which God prepared in advance for us to do. The in advance part, right? That always gets me too, because as I look back just on my own life and how I got here, there are so many examples of God's hand at work in the whole process, right? I grew up in Nebraska. I said I would never leave Nebraska.
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, I have learned to never say never, because as I was growing up, I was like, oh, I'd never be a teacher. No, I was a teacher. I would never go to Concordia University, Nebraska. Guess where I went, right?
There you go.
I said I would never be a Lutheran teacher. And then Becca came along and said, oh, you just need a couple more classes. So it's so fun and interesting to see that plan that has already been put in place well in advance come to fruition, right? And as we are talking about this and maybe what the future holds, not only for us, Lamb of God, our own individual futures, right? I can't hardly tell you what tomorrow brings, right? But I know
that's the truth.
I know.
Can't hardly. Sorry, Derek. You can't tell me what tomorrow brings.
But we know who does and know who can.
Yeah, right.
And so that's comforting too. Just in the knowledge that we are not in this alone, that God is walking there beside us. He does call us to the well to drink from his water for a very good reason. Because if we were to do this alone, it would not turn out well by any means.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know, just thinking about the scripture that you were reading, that stuck out to me right away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a different way to say God has a purpose and plan for you, right? So usually, I'll be honest and say that I usually despise every time we quote Jeremiah 29:11 because it's so out of context and it's not necessarily what that passage is about. Because if you read around it, basically God promises, hey, there's going to be good things, but everyone in this generation is going to die first, and then there'll be something good. And that's not usually how we use that. But this is a place where I think we can talk about purpose and plan, that God does have a plan for you to serve and to be, here's the thing we haven't talked about, to be his mask in the world. So this is another Luther idea that in our vocations, we are mask of God, which is such a beautiful thing too, that it's not us necessarily at work, it's God at work through us in relationship with other people. And so these things that we do that might seem normal and boring and insignificant have been prepared, or God knew they were going to happen a long time ago, before you were born even. And in that way, there is purpose there, right? There is a plan, if you want to use that language. And again, that's comforting, it's empowering, I think, because so often, and maybe this is a way to speak to some of the sort of current stuff like high schoolers and things, the pressure to know what you want to do exactly as you want to do it today is so high. And I think it's higher now than it necessarily ever has been, right? I mean, in some ways, I think some people say, well, you just were forced to do things, right? You didn't really have a choice. But now that we have a choice, some people do anyway, there's that sort of paralysis of knowing exactly how you're going to do, what you're going to do. And this really frees you up. So just like we might say, hey, you could do a lot of things in your life. There's not one thing for you to do that, hey, this is freeing because of that. That if you even quote unquote miss the boat, right? If you don't find a job that is the most bestest, the most awesomest, the most funnest, if you will. Yes, I know none of those are words. That's okay. Because even in an 8 to 4, 8 to 5, I hate my life and my job role, you still have other vocations, right? And so even if that means sometimes you have to slog through the normal parts of your day, there are other ways and times that God is still using you, that it's not our eggs are not all in one basket, is what I guess I'm trying to get to.
And you don't have to be in ministry, right, as your job to be in ministry. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the beautiful thing too, just about being disciples, right? Jesus doesn't say, go to college to become a pastor, go to college to become a Lutheran educator. Now, we would love for that to happen, of course, right? Shout out to all the Lutheran educators, pastors, etc., for answering the call and whatnot. But we do have the ability to minister and to preach and share the good news with anybody at any point in time, whether our role is ministry related or not.
Absolutely. Any closing thoughts?
We are a work in progress, and I'm not saying the podcast necessarily, right?
Sure we are.
We are a work in progress in the standpoint that our walk and our relationship with Christ is always going to be growing and changing, just like our relationships with one another are, right? And the ability to learn and to grow together is a beautiful and a wonderful thing, right? The early church, they met in people's homes, right?
Mm-hmm.
If this is the modern version of Christians meeting in each other's homes, wonderful, right? But it's just a beautiful and wonderful thing that we get to talk about Christ in what we do and our vocation.
Mm-hmm.
But we can also do that outside of our vocation of our jobs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can talk about Jesus in your vocation and everything.
Yep.
Every vocation you have, you can talk about Christ in that way. Great. So, hey, thanks for joining us around the well today. Thanks for drinking from the water of Jesus. We'd love to hear what you think. You have anything you think we should talk about? Anything that you would like to hear? Not necessarily what we think. That's a weird way to say that. But if there's anything you want us to take up on a desert well conversation, please let us know in the comments. Talk to us in person. But we are glad that you're here. Please share this with those of you that you think they would like and need to hear what we have to say and to be a part of this desert well conversation. So we'll catch you and we'll see you on the next one.
Take care.